Hello guys. So in today's lesson we are going to look at the first major rebellion against Elizabeth. She's been on the throne for 10 years, she's pleased most of England, but in today's lesson we will see the first real challenge to her crown. This lesson is called What Was the Revolt of the Northern Earls? And our lesson objectives are we're going to try to understand what caused the revolt of the Northern Earls. And we're going to look at what were the consequences of this revolt. Now, as always, please make sure you've got the worksheet open in front of you from Google Classrooms to fill in the free tasks as you go along. This worksheet needs to be submitted by Sunday the 14th of June, 5 p.m. Please make sure you press submit. Don't do amazing work and then just leave it there. Your teacher won't see it. And as always, any questions or feedback, contact me, gbrown@stopseyhighschool.co.uk. So, before we go any further, let's break that title down. Revolt of the Northern Earls. Well, revolt basically means a rebellion or fighting against Elizabeth. Northern Earls are basically nobles from rich, powerful families who lived in the north of England. So essentially what we've got is we have got the fight of rich, powerful people against Elizabeth in the north of England. Now, here's a question. What would make someone fight against their own queen? We call that committing treason. The worst crime you could commit back then. Let's have a look. So this is a Northern Earl. This is one of our main focus points for today's lesson. His name is Thomas Percy, and he is the Earl of Northumberland. So he's a noble, very rich, very powerful. And like most of the north of England, he was a Catholic. Now, he was worried. He did not want a Protestant queen in charge. And actually, he was getting worried about the future of his religion. England had been a Protestant country for 10 years now since Elizabeth took the throne. He was worried it might never be Catholic again. And this worry deepened when Elizabeth sent a Protestant called James Pilkington to Durham in the north of England. And she said, James, I want you to go to these churches. I want you to make sure they are all worshipping the correct way. I want to make sure there's no Catholicism going on. He was put in charge of the churches and he was given the title Archbishop of Durham in 1561. So he was now poking his nose in, basically, making sure that Catholics were going to these churches. Now, by doing this, Elizabeth was slowly trying to move the north of England from being Catholic to being Protestant. So Durham's there on the map where James Pilkington went up to. You can see it's in the north of England, near Scotland. Okay, but it's not just about religion why Thomas Percy doesn't like Elizabeth. Now, Northumberland came from a very rich and very powerful family. His family had helped monarchs before. They'd had important jobs. They'd given advice to previous kings and queens. Even Thomas Percy himself had helped Elizabeth's half-sister, Mary I, when she was on the throne. And so Thomas Percy was expecting to be able to help Elizabeth to run the country, because that's what he had done with the previous monarch. That's what his dad had done. That's what his granddad had done. That's what his family had always done. It was his turn now to help the monarch. But Elizabeth didn't want Northumberland's help in running the country. Northumberland basically turns up and he says, right, I'm here. Do you want me to help you run the country? Do you want my advice? And she says, no, not really. I've got my Protestant Privy Council to help me. I've got Protestants like Sir John Forster to help me. I don't need you, Northumberland. I don't really want your advice. And that's a bit of a snub that the Earl of Northumberland never really gets over, the fact that he wasn't needed. He felt his power was going away. He felt that his family deserved better than that. Make matters worse, Elizabeth also took land away from Northumberland and gave it to Protestants, including a copper mine that was worth a lot of money that had been found on the Earl of Northumberland's land. And Elizabeth said, right, that can go to a Protestant so they can make money. And there were newcomers like William Cecil, who were close to Elizabeth, and they gave advice, but they didn't come from these ancient noble families like Northumberland did. And Northumberland was angry. Who were these new people turning up? They didn't have the background, they didn't have the pedigree. They were Protestants. How dare Elizabeth take advice from these people and not from the ancient northern families like his? So let's recap. Thomas Percy, the Earl of Northumberland, was losing his religion. That'd be a good song. He was losing power and he was losing money. It wasn't just him, though. Charles Neville, the Earl of Westmoreland, was in exactly the same position. Catholic, losing power. His family had helped Elizabeth, and now Elizabeth didn't want anything to do with them. Sorry, his family had helped the monarchs before Elizabeth, and now Elizabeth didn't want anything to do with him. So these two work together, the Earl of Northumberland and the Earl of Westmoreland. They've also got another concern. It's not just about the fact that religion is changing. It's not just about power and wealth. There's another thing they're worried about. Well, Elizabeth had not named an heir to the throne. That means that someone to replace her when she died. She'd not said, if I die, this person takes the throne, this person replaces me. And she was really the only person who could decide who replaced her. She's not married yet. She's not had any children yet. And so this creates a situation where, if you imagine if she died suddenly, England would be thrown into chaos. There was no clear monarch, no clear king or queen to replace her. No one knew who the next leader would be. And so you'd end up with the country fighting itself. Because some people want someone on the throne, some people want someone else on the throne. You need it to be clear, and Elizabeth wasn't doing that. That was a recipe for disaster, and that would have led to what we call civil war. So, Thomas Percy and Charles Neville need to find someone in England who is Catholic, could be heir to the throne of England without too many complaints. Not just get a beggar off the streets. It's got to be someone who could be heir to the throne. Someone who would give them their power back. Now, who do we think in England might fit that description? Someone we looked at last lesson. Someone who's just arrived the year before. Well done if you said Mary, Queen of Scots. She'd arrived the previous year and she's the perfect candidate. Because she's Catholic. Because she could be heir to the throne of England. She's from a royal family. And she would work with the Earls and give them their power back. So, I imagine the conversation would have gone something like this. We need to get Mary, Queen of Scots, married to a suitable, rich Englishman as soon as possible. Then, when Elizabeth dies, it will be clear to all that Mary, Queen of Scots, is the next monarch of England. And Charles Neville, the Earl of Westmoreland, his brother-in-law, Thomas Howard, called the Duke of Norfolk, was a very rich noble. He owned a lot of land. He was one of the most powerful people in England at the time. He said he was a Protestant, but he didn't like these other new Protestants coming along, like William Cecil. Thomas Howard said he would help. He would be a part of this plot. Okay, so task 1. Let's try and understand why the Northern Earls were not happy with Elizabeth by 1569. Why were these people wanting change? So can you think about, please, what was happening to their religion? They were Catholic. Why is that a problem? What was happening to their power and influence? Was Elizabeth listening to them? What had their families done previously? Who was Elizabeth now listening to? How would they feel about this? And why were they worried? What would happen if Elizabeth kept refusing to name an heir to the throne? What would happen if she died suddenly? What would happen to England? Have a go at this task for me, please. Try and think about those 3 reasons there. Pause the video, the purple slides will help you, and then press play to continue. Okay, so the secret plan is this. Mary, Queen of Scots, and the Duke of Norfolk, both pictured here, they would marry in secret. They're not going to live together, they're not going to go off on honeymoon together, there's not going to be a big ceremony, it's going to be in secret. And then Elizabeth doesn't need to know. When Elizabeth dies, Mary can just take the throne. She's from royal blood. She's married to one of the most powerful people in England. It's really clear there's no one who can object to her taking the throne. There's no one else. And that meant that the Earls, like Northumberland, like Westmoreland, they would get their power and influence back. Then Mary, Queen of Scots, would restore the Catholic faith and she would listen to them as well. Why is it a secret? Why not just tell Elizabeth this is what we're going to do? Well, Elizabeth had to agree to any nobles like the Earls marrying. She had to give permission. She doesn't want them to marry the wrong people. And also, Elizabeth didn't want anyone interfering with who should replace her on the throne. Elizabeth said that the matter of who would be heir to the throne, who would replace her, was royal prerogative. And that basically means it's my business. It's no one else's business who replaces me. I decide. I'll do it in my own time, so back off. Here's the thing. Some people found out about this plan. They heard these murmurs, they heard these rumours of what was going on, but they kept it secret. They thought it might actually be good for England. They thought actually it might bring stability. And I think some people are probably worried about Elizabeth's temper as well. Eventually, though, with all secrets, the more people you tell, eventually it gets found out. Robert Dudley, one of Elizabeth's closest friends, finds out and he tells her of the plan. He says, look, they're planning to marry Mary, Queen of Scots, with the Duke of Norfolk. Elizabeth calls her Protestant nobles from the south to discuss what to do. What should the action steps be? The first thing she does is she says, right, Duke of Norfolk, I want him placed under arrest in October 1569. Which is clever, really, because there's no marriage. If he's under arrest, they can't take their vows, can they? Brilliant, decisive thinking from Elizabeth. And news of this arrest reaches the Northern Earls, who panic. Elizabeth is onto them. The Queen knows about our plans. We are in huge trouble. We should just give up the plans to marry Mary, Queen of Scots and the Duke of Norfolk now. And both Northumberland and Westmoreland were prepared to give up the plans. Just abandon it and say it's not worth it now. But their wives got involved. Jane Neville said, don't you dare give up. Keep fighting. This is our chance to get rid of Elizabeth. Let's change the plan around now. And Anne Percy, I couldn't find a picture of Anne Percy. This will do. This is close enough. Anne Percy said, look, all the Catholics will join you. If you rise up, if you march towards London, the Catholics in the north will join you, will form an army, will get rid of Elizabeth completely. The plan shouldn't change, it's just been modified. Let's recap that plan. So the secret plan was Mary, Queen of Scots and the Duke of Norfolk would marry in secret. We now know why. When Elizabeth died, Mary would take the throne. Not before. And the Earls would then get their power and influence back. Thing is, this plan's now changed a little bit. This is the new secret plan. The Earl of Northumberland and Westmoreland would raise armies and they would march south towards Elizabeth. That wasn't in the original plan. Spain would get involved and send thousands of Catholic troops to support them. Again, it's now getting a bit more severe than it was originally. Elizabeth would be overthrown, along with her Protestant supporters, these people from new families who the Earls despised. Mary, Queen of Scots, would be freed, ready to marry the Duke of Norfolk and take the throne. That is a huge change. So, let's have a look at this next task. Can you explain to me how the Northern Earls' plan had changed due to Elizabeth finding out and arresting Norfolk? Think about what they now hoped to do. So what was now going to happen to Elizabeth compared to what was going to happen before? And think about who was now involved. Think about countries that maybe have now got involved that weren't before. Pause the video here. Those blue slides will help you. And then press play to continue. Okay, so now we've got actual drama. This plan has started to kick off. The Earls raised an army of about 4,000 men in the north of England, and they started to march south. Their first stop was Durham Cathedral. Now, can you think why? Can you think who was at Durham Cathedral? We looked at him at the start of this lesson. Well done if you said James Pilkington, who, when he heard about this massive army marching towards the cathedral, he knew what was going on, he worked out he'd be in trouble, and he just flees south. He gets out of there straight away. This army enters the cathedral, and Catholic Mass was said that night. And it was also said in churches across the northeast for the next fortnight. Catholicism was back in the north of England. They were ignoring Elizabeth's religious changes. Any evidence of Protestantism was destroyed. It was gone. These people were rebelling against their queen. What happens next? Elizabeth moved Mary to Coventry Castle. She brings her a bit further south. This would make the rebels plot harder. They wouldn't know where she was. Now, the rebels succeeding depends on how many men they can get to fight the Protestant queen. And this is really a test now, because if people in England don't like Elizabeth, they will not fight for her. Instead, they will join the army that is trying to get rid of her. Elizabeth has to hope that she has proved popular enough that she can fight off this rebellion. There are two key events. First of all, Elizabeth was able to raise an army of 14,000 to take on the 4,000 rebels. She's got the numbers. She's popular enough. And also, the Spanish troops never arrive. Philip II, the King of Spain, basically said, I don't want Mary Queen of Scots on the throne because Mary Queen of Scots, as we know, was very close to France. France is my biggest enemy. France was Spain's biggest enemy. So Philip II didn't want to do anything that would help power France up. What happens next? 16th of December, 1569. These two rebel forces meet by the River Tees, as I've shown you on the map there. And when the 4,000 soldiers see how big Elizabeth's army is, they basically turn around and run away as quickly as possible, led by Northumberland and Westmoreland, who suddenly realise neither of them want to be in England anymore. Elizabeth has won. There's not that much fighting that takes place. It's not a huge battle. Elizabeth sends Earls from the south of England to march the armies forward, and so news breaks to her in London that she has been victorious. She has won. What were the consequences? Let's go through these. Well, Elizabeth had been patient with people before about religion, but actually she had to send a message here, she felt. So around 450 rebels were executed for taking part in the rebellion. Elizabeth was sending a statement not to try to overthrow her again. What happens to our key players? Northumberland fled to Scotland, but he was captured and he was executed. And his head was placed on a spike above the city gate to warn people not to attempt any other revolts. What happened to Westmoreland? He escaped to Belgium. He escaped to Flanders in Belgium, where he lived in poverty. He'd spent all of his money. He never sees his wife and children again. The Privy Council, if you remember, Elizabeth's advisors, they said, good, you've killed the two main players. Get rid of the Duke of Norfolk as well. He is responsible. But Elizabeth released him. Elizabeth said, no, I'm going to let him go. The Privy Council also wanted Mary Queen of Scots dealt with as well. But Elizabeth said no. She will remain in captivity, and she stays there for the next 14 years still. And so it looks like Elizabeth's dealt with the problem, doesn't it? It looks like the revolt, we know why the revolt happened. We know some of the parts of the revolt and how it changed, and how Elizabeth was able to deal with it. And it looks like there's a happy ending. But there is a plot twist. And that is the year after, in 1570, the Pope told Catholics across the world that Elizabeth was not a part of the Christian church. She was not recognised as a person. She was basically evil. Now, the term is called excommunication. So Elizabeth was evil, and Elizabeth wasn't recognised by the church, and people could basically do what they wanted to her. And the Pope issues an order. Now, when the Pope issues an order, it's called a papal bull. It's got a fancy term. And this said that Catholics should continue to rebel against Elizabeth. The revolt of the Northern Earls was a good start, but it wasn't enough. Elizabeth has to go. So, although the majority of English Catholics had proved their loyalty by not fighting Elizabeth in 1569, they now have to choose between these two people. You're either loyal to your monarch, Elizabeth, and you do as she says, and you go to these church services, or you are loyal to your spiritual leader. You're loyal to the Pope, and you follow his orders. You don't obey Elizabeth, and you try to have her removed. You fight against her. So who do you follow now? Your monarch or the spiritual leader, God's representative on earth? You cannot do both. You cannot follow Elizabeth and try and get rid of her as well. You've got to choose, and this made life tough for the Catholics as a result. And it made life tough for Elizabeth as well, because now she can't trust any Catholics in England. She doesn't know who was loyal and who was just pretending. So she brought in new laws. You could now be executed for treason if you said Elizabeth was not the true Queen of England, if you said Elizabeth was the wrong religion, that's what we call a heretic, or if you were found to have any papal bulls like we've seen here, any information from the Pope, if you had any, or if you were caught sharing any out and trying to get people to turn against Elizabeth, you could be in trouble. So let's have a look at our third task then. Our final task, Elizabeth's problems with Catholics ended once she had defeated the revolt of the Northern Earls. Have a look at that statement. Her problems with Catholics ended once she had defeated the revolt of the Northern Earls. Interesting. Can you tell me if you agree or disagree with this statement? Now, don't just put I agree. Don't just write 2 lines. I'm looking for a paragraph here. I'm looking for detail. Bring in evidence. Bring in precise explanation that explains why you have that point of view. The pink slides will help if you pause the video here to write that task down and then press play to end the lesson. And that's it, guys. That's a huge lesson we've looked at there, so well done. Elizabeth's first major challenge, Revolt of the Northern Earls. Again, make sure you submit that worksheet, please. Sunday the 14th of June at 5 p.m. Any questions or feedback, please contact me, gbrown@stopshighschool.co.uk. And I will see you next lesson, where we will see how the Pope actions caused more problems for Elizabeth. There would be more plots against her life. Until then, look after yourself, get some exercise and fresh air, and I'll see you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.